Born into a world where his very existence was illegal, hidden in a basket among the reeds of the Nile River, Moses should have died in his first days of life. Instead, he became arguably the most influential prophet in human history. His impact reaches far beyond Judaism, touching Christianity, Islam, law, ethics, politics, and even how we think about freedom itself. But here's what makes Moses truly different. Most prophets are born into religious families and raised for their calling. Moses was raised in the palace of the very Pharaoh who wanted him dead, lived as Egyptian royalty for 40 years, then spent another 40 years as an anonymous shepherd in the wilderness. Only then, at 80 years old, did his real life begin. His story centers on one deceptively simple claim: that he spoke with God face to face, and that through him, God gave humanity its most fundamental laws. This might sound like ancient mythology, but consider this. Every court system in the Western world, every concept of human rights, every idea about the dignity of the individual, every notion that some things are simply wrong, regardless of what any king or government says, traces back to this moment. If we get Moses wrong, we get everything wrong. If you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps more than you know. I'm always curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with what city you're from, what time it is there. Love seeing our little global community connect through these stories. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're going to explore why Moses remains the most studied, most debated, and most consequential figure in the history of religion and law. We begin with a desperate mother and a river that would change the world. Part 1. The birth of a revolutionary, hidden in plain sight. In the ancient world, around the 13th century BCE, Egypt stood as the greatest superpower on earth. The pharaohs commanded armies, built monuments that touched the sky, and claimed to be living gods. Their word was absolute law, their power unchallenged. But they had a problem. The Israelites, descendants of Jacob, who had come to Egypt during a famine generations earlier, had multiplied beyond what anyone expected. What started as 70 people settling in Goshen had become hundreds of thousands. They were becoming too numerous, too strong, too much of a potential threat. The book of Exodus opens with a new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, who had forgotten the history of how Joseph saved Egypt from famine and why the Israelites were there. This Pharaoh saw only numbers, only potential enemies. So he enslaved them, forcing them to build his treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. He worked them brutally, hoping to break their spirit and slow their growth. It didn't work. The more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. So Pharaoh escalated. He gave a horrifying order to the Hebrew midwives. Every male child born to the Israelites must be killed at birth. Let the girls live, but the boys must die. The midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, refused. They feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. They told Pharaoh that Hebrew women were too vigorous, giving birth before the midwives could arrive. Pharaoh then made his decree public. Every Hebrew boy must be thrown into the Nile River. This is the world into which Moses was born. His parents, Amram and Jochebed, of the tribe of Levi, already had 2 children, Miriam and Aaron. When their 3rd child arrived, a boy, they faced an impossible choice: obey Pharaoh and murder their son, or hide him and risk their entire family's destruction. The text says simply that when Jochebed saw her son, She saw that he was good, not just healthy, not just beautiful, but good. There was something about this child that made her certain he had to live, whatever the cost. She hid him for 3 months. But you cannot hide a baby forever. Babies cry, babies make noise, and in the close quarters where the enslaved Israelites lived, discovery was inevitable. So Jochebed did something that seems insane, but was actually brilliant. She made a basket, sealed it with pitch and tar to make it waterproof, and placed her baby in the reeds at the edge of the Nile River. The same river where Pharaoh had commanded all Hebrew boys to be thrown. The river of death became a river of life. She placed him exactly where Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe. This was not random. Jochebed knew the princess's routine. She was staging a rescue, gambling everything on the hope that an Egyptian princess would have mercy. Miriam, Moses' sister, watched from a distance to see what would happen. When Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river with her attendants, she saw the basket among the reeds. She sent her maid to fetch it. When she opened it and saw the baby crying, the text gives us one of the most important sentences in the entire story. She had compassion on him. An Egyptian princess had compassion on a Hebrew baby who should have been murdered by her father's command. This moment of mercy changed history. Pharaoh's daughter knew immediately that this was one of the Hebrew children. The timing, the location, the circumstances, it was obvious. But she didn't care about her father's decree. She saw a baby, a human being, and she chose compassion over law, over politics, over loyalty to her father's genocidal policy. Now comes Miriam's moment. She stepped forward and asked the princess, "Should I go and call a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" The princess agreed. Miriam ran and got Jochebed, Moses' own mother. Pharaoh's daughter hired Jochebed to nurse her own son, paying her to raise him. This is narrative artistry of the highest order. The mother who was forced to give up her child gets to raise him after all, gets paid to do it, and does so under the protection of Pharaoh's own daughter. The irony is perfect. Pharaoh's decree to kill all Hebrew boys leads directly to his daughter rescuing one and raising him in the palace. When the child was weaned, old enough to be separated from his mother, Jochebed brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter. She adopted him as her son and named him Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." The name would prove prophetic, because Moses would later draw his entire people out of water, leading them through the Red Sea. Moses grew up in the palace as an Egyptian prince. He received the finest education available in the ancient world. He learned to read and write hieroglyphics, studied mathematics, astronomy, Egyptian theology. He was trained in leadership, in administration, in the arts of war. Everything that would later make him capable of leading a nation, he learned in Pharaoh's court. The New Testament book of Acts tells us that Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and in deeds. Jewish tradition elaborates on this, saying Moses became a military commander, that he was eloquent and powerful, a prince with a future in Egyptian politics. But he knew he was Hebrew. His birth mother had nursed him for years before he entered the palace. She would have told him who he was, who his people were, what was happening to them. He carried the secret of his identity through his youth and into adulthood. The text gives us no glimpses of Moses' inner life during these years. We don't know what he thought, what he felt, how he reconciled his Hebrew identity with his Egyptian upbringing? Did he struggle with guilt for living in luxury while his people suffered? Did he feel divided, caught between two worlds? The narrative is silent, which makes what comes next even more dramatic. One day, when Moses was grown, he went out to see his people, to see their burdens. This verb, went out, is crucial. He deliberately left the palace to witness what was happening to the Israelites. This was a choice, an act of solidarity, of identifying with the oppressed rather than the oppressor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brothers. Moses looked this way and that, saw that no one was watching, and killed the Egyptian. He hid the body in the sand. This is the first action Moses takes in the biblical narrative as an adult, and it's murder. Not self-defense, not an accident, but a deliberate killing. He saw injustice and responded with violence, with righteous rage that overrode whatever loyalty he was supposed to have to Egypt. The next day, he went out again and saw two Hebrews fighting. He tried to intervene, asking the one who was in the wrong, "Why are you striking your fellow?" The man responded with words that terrified Moses. "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses realized his crime was known. If the Hebrews knew, Pharaoh would soon know. And indeed, Pharaoh heard about it and sought to kill Moses. The prince who had grown up in the palace was now a wanted murderer, his privileged life over in an instant. Moses fled. He ran from Egypt into the wilderness of Midian, leaving behind everything he had known, everything he had been. This flight was not just physical, but existential. He was no longer an Egyptian prince, but he was also cut off from his Hebrew people who didn't accept his authority. He was nothing, nobody, alone in the desert. This is the pattern we'll see again and again in Moses' life: abandonment, rescue, calling. He was abandoned as a baby and rescued by Pharaoh's daughter. Now he's abandoned everything and will be rescued by a different kind of family. Each time he's stripped down, reduced to nothing, before being built back up for a new purpose. When Moses arrived in Midian, exhausted from his journey, he sat down by a well. Wells are crucial locations in biblical narratives, places where destinies intersect, where the future begins. Abraham's servant found Rebekah at a well. Jacob met Rachel at a well. And Moses will meet his wife at this well. 7 daughters of the priest of Midian came to draw water for their father's flocks, but shepherds drove them away, taking the well for themselves. Moses stood up and defended them, watered their flock himself. When they returned home early, their father Reuel, also called Jethro, asked why. They told him about the Egyptian who had helped them. Notice they called him an Egyptian. Moses looked Egyptian, spoke Egyptian, carried himself like an Egyptian. He was so assimilated into Egyptian culture that even after fleeing Egypt, that's how strangers identified him. This detail shows how complete his Egyptian upbringing had been. Reuel invited Moses to stay with them. Moses agreed and lived with this Midianite priest. Eventually, Reuel gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore him a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." That name encapsulates Moses' entire existence. He was a Hebrew baby in an Egyptian palace, a stranger. He was an Egyptian prince among Hebrew slaves, a stranger. Now he's a Hebrew refugee in Midian, still a stranger. He has never belonged anywhere, never been fully at home, always divided, always alien. For 40 years, Moses lived in Midian as a shepherd, 40 years. The prince who commanded armies now guided sheep through the wilderness. The scholar who read hieroglyphics now spent days in silence watching animals graze. The potential ruler of Egypt now answered to a Midianite priest. This was not wasted time. Moses was being prepared, though he didn't know it. He was learning the wilderness, the terrain where he would later lead his people for 40 more years. He was learning patience, learning to lead creatures who need constant guidance and care, like the Israelites would need. He was being humbled, stripped of ego and ambition, reduced to the basics of survival and simplicity. The text tells us that during these years in Midian, the Pharaoh of Egypt died, but his successor was no better. The Israelites continued to groan under their bondage, and their cry came up to God. Finally, after generations of silence, after hundreds of years of slavery, God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Moses knew nothing of this. He was keeping his father-in-law's flock, leading them to the far side of the wilderness, to a mountain called Horeb, the mountain of God. Just an ordinary day, doing what he had done for 4 decades. He was 80 years old, an old man by the standards of the time, his life of adventure seemingly over, living out his days in obscurity. Then he saw something strange. A bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. The flames consumed nothing. Moses said to himself, "I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." That decision to turn aside, to investigate the strange instead of walking past, that moment of curiosity changed everything. How many others might have seen the burning bush and kept walking, too busy, too practical, too focused on the sheep to be bothered by oddities? Moses turned aside, and when God saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him from the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." Part 2. The burning bush. When God speaks. When God called Moses' name from the burning bush, everything changed. Not gradually, not through a process, but in an instant. The old man tending sheep became something else, someone chosen, someone called, someone who would never again have the luxury of obscurity. God's first words were a command. "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." This is the first time in the biblical narrative that a specific place is called holy. Not a temple, not an altar built by humans, but a patch of desert ground made holy by God's presence. Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. This fear is important. It's not psychological nervousness, but existential recognition. Moses understood immediately that he was in the presence of something utterly other, something overwhelming, something before which a human being is nothing. Then God identified himself. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Not the gods of Egypt, not a new deity, but the God his ancestors worshipped, the God of the covenant, the God who had promised his people a future even when they were enslaved in Egypt. God continued, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey." This is one of the most important theological statements in all of Scripture. God sees suffering. God hears cries. God knows. And God acts. The God of Israel is not distant or indifferent, but intimately concerned with human suffering, particularly the suffering of the powerless. But then came the shocking part. "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." Moses' response was immediate and completely understandable. "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" It's a perfect question. Who was he? A murderer, a fugitive, an 80-year-old shepherd who had spent 40 years in the wilderness. He was nobody, nothing, with no authority, no power, no credentials. How could he possibly confront the most powerful ruler on earth and demand the release of hundreds of thousands of slaves? God's answer is one of the most important in the entire Bible. "But I will be with you." Not, "You are more capable than you think." Not, "You have hidden strengths." Simply, "I will be with you." The success of the mission does not depend on Moses' abilities, but on God's presence. God gave Moses a sign. "When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this very mountain." The sign wouldn't come until after the mission was accomplished. Moses had to move forward on faith, with only God's promise as assurance. But Moses wasn't satisfied. He raised objection after objection, showing both his genuine humility and his very human reluctance to accept such a terrifying calling. "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" This question goes deeper than it seems. In the ancient world, knowing someone's name meant having power over them, understanding their nature. Moses was asking, "Who are you really? What can I tell them about the God who sends me?" God's answer has been debated for millennia. "I am who I am," or "I will be what I will be." The Hebrew phrase, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, is deliberately enigmatic, refusing to pin God down to a simple definition. God's name is a mystery, a refusal to be categorized or controlled. Then God gave a more specific name. "Thus you shall say to the people of Israel, YHWH, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." YHWH, the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name so sacred that later Jews would not pronounce it, replacing it with Adonai, Lord, when reading scripture. This name connects to the verb to be, suggesting that God is the source of all existence, the ground of being itself. God gave Moses detailed instructions. He was to gather the elders of Israel and tell them that God had appeared to him, that God would bring them out of Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. He was to go with the elders to Pharaoh and request permission to go 3 days' journey into the wilderness to worship. God was honest with Moses. "I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go." This is striking. God knew Pharaoh would refuse. The mission was not to convince Pharaoh through persuasion, but to force his hand through displays of divine power. The confrontation was inevitable, the conflict already decided. Moses was not being sent to negotiate, but to demonstrate God's supremacy over Egypt's gods and Pharaoh's authority. But Moses wasn't finished objecting. "Behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, 'The Lord did not appear to you.'" God responded by giving Moses 3 signs to perform. First, God asked what Moses had in his hand. "A staff," Moses replied. God told him to throw it on the ground, and it became a serpent. Moses fled from it. But God told him to pick it up by the tail, and it became a staff again. This sign was loaded with meaning. In Egyptian iconography, the serpent represented royal power. Pharaoh's crown bore a cobra symbol. By commanding a serpent, Moses would symbolically demonstrate power over Pharaoh himself. The second sign, God told Moses to put his hand inside his cloak. When he drew it out, it was leprous, white as snow. Then God told him to put it back, and when Moses drew it out again, it was restored. Leprosy was seen as divine judgment, so the ability to give and remove it demonstrated divine authority. The third sign, if they don't believe the first two signs, Moses was to take water from the Nile and pour it on the ground, and it would become blood. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, worshipped as a god. Turning it to blood would be an assault on Egypt's religious system itself. Still, Moses objected, "Oh, my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." This is fascinating because the book of Acts says Moses was mighty in words. Either Moses had lost his eloquence during his 40 years in the wilderness, or he was simply terrified and grasping for excuses. Probably both. God's response showed patience mixed with frustration. Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute, or deaf, or seeing, or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth, and teach you what you shall speak. But Moses made one last desperate plea. "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." This angered God. Moses had been given signs, promises, assurances, yet he still refused. Finally, God offered a compromise. "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him." So Moses would be the prophet receiving God's words, and Aaron would be the spokesman. This arrangement would create both partnership and tension throughout their journey. Moses had wanted to escape the calling entirely. Instead, he got a helper who would sometimes complicate rather than simplify matters. Moses returned to Jethro and asked permission to go back to Egypt to see if his people were still alive. Jethro blessed him. "Go in peace." God told Moses that all who sought his life were dead, so he could return safely. Moses took his wife and sons, put them on a donkey, and started back toward Egypt with the staff of God in his hand. God gave Moses a message for Pharaoh. "Israel is my firstborn son, and I say to you, let my son go, that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son." This is the warning that would eventually be fulfilled in the 10th plague, the death of Egypt's firstborn. God was announcing the stakes from the beginning: Pharaoh's son against God's son. But Pharaoh would not understand until it was too late. Then something bizarre and disturbing happened. On the way to Egypt, at a lodging place, the Lord met him and sought to kill him. Zipporah, Moses' wife, took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it, saying, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." Then God let Moses alone. This is one of the most cryptic and troubling passages in the entire Bible. Why would God, immediately after calling Moses to his mission, try to kill him? The text doesn't explain, but tradition suggests that Moses had failed to circumcise his son, violating the covenant sign given to Abraham. Zipporah's quick action performing the circumcision herself, saved Moses' life. The incident shows that Moses, even as God's chosen prophet, was not exempt from covenant obligations. It also shows Zipporah's courage and quick thinking. She understood what needed to be done and did it, despite its gruesome nature. The phrase, bridegroom of blood, suggests she was not happy about this near-death experience caused by religious law. After this, Moses continued toward Egypt. God told Aaron to meet Moses in the wilderness, and Aaron went to the mountain of God and kissed him. Moses told Aaron everything God had said and shown him. Together, they went to Egypt and gathered all the elders of the people of Israel. Aaron spoke the words Moses had been given, and Moses performed the signs before the people. The text says simply, "And the people believed." When they heard that God had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. This moment of belief and worship wouldn't last. The Israelites would doubt, complain, and rebel many times. But in this first moment, they believed. They dared to hope that their suffering might finally end, that the God of their fathers had not forgotten them. Moses and Aaron were ready for their confrontation with Pharaoh. They didn't know it would require 10 plagues, months of escalating conflict, and the death of Egypt's firstborn before Pharaoh would let them go. They didn't know the Red Sea would split before them, or that they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years. They only knew that God had sent them, and they had to obey. The collision between the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt was about to begin. Part 3. Let my people go. The battle of gods and kings. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh with a message that must have seemed insane. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. Pharaoh's response dripped with contempt. Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. This was more than political refusal. Pharaoh was claiming not to know YHWH, dismissing this Hebrew deity as irrelevant. Pharaoh himself was considered a living god, the son of Ra. He bowed to no one, certainly not to the God of his slaves. Moses and Aaron tried again, requesting just a 3-day journey into the wilderness to worship, warning that if they didn't, God might strike them with plague or sword. But Pharaoh saw this as laziness, as slaves trying to escape work with religious excuses. His response was brutal. He increased their burden. Previously, Egyptians had supplied the Israelites with straw to make bricks. Now, the Israelites had to gather their own straw while maintaining the same production quota. It was impossible, calculated to break their spirits. The Israelite foremen were beaten when the people couldn't meet the quota. They appealed to Pharaoh, but he called them lazy, said that's why they wanted to go sacrifice. When they left Pharaoh's presence, they met Moses and Aaron and said bitterly, "The Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." Their suffering had increased, not decreased. Moses had made things worse. This is the first of many times the Israelites would turn on Moses, blaming him for their troubles. And Moses turned to God with his own complaint. "O Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all." It's a raw prayer, an honest accusation. Moses was not being diplomatic or submissive, but demanding answers from God. Why send me if you're not going to help? Why make things worse? This honesty in prayer, this willingness to argue with God, becomes a pattern throughout Moses' life. God's response reaffirmed the promise. Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land. God reminded Moses of the covenant, of the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God would deliver them, bring them to the promised land, and they would know that YHWH is their God. But when Moses told this to the Israelites, they didn't listen because of their broken spirits and harsh slavery. They were too crushed to hope. So God sent Moses back to Pharaoh, and Moses objected again. Behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me? For I am of uncircumcised lips. The text then gives us genealogies, tracing Moses and Aaron's lineage through Levi. This serves to establish their credentials, to show they were legitimate representatives of Israel. Then God told Moses again to go to Pharaoh, and the real confrontation began. God told Moses to make Aaron throw down his staff before Pharaoh, and it would become a serpent. They did this, and Pharaoh called his wise men and sorcerers, and the magicians of Egypt did the same with their secret arts. Each threw down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. This is crucial. The Egyptian magicians could replicate some of Moses' signs, suggesting they had real supernatural power, perhaps demonic. But Aaron's staff consumed theirs, demonstrating superior power. Yet Pharaoh's heart was hardened. He would not listen. Then came the plagues, 10 escalating demonstrations of divine power designed to break Pharaoh's will and demonstrate YHWH's supremacy over Egypt's gods. The first plague, water turned to blood. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh at the Nile, the very place where Hebrew babies had been drowned. Aaron struck the water with his staff, and all the water in Egypt turned to blood. The fish died, the river stank, and Egyptians couldn't drink from it. But Pharaoh's magicians did the same with their secret arts, so Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. The second plague, frogs. 7 days later, Aaron stretched out his staff over the waters, and frogs came up and covered the land. They were in houses, bedrooms, beds, ovens, even kneading bowls. The magicians replicated this too, but they couldn't remove the frogs. Pharaoh begged Moses to pray to God to remove them, promising to let the people go. Moses did, and the frogs died, leaving heaps of stinking corpses. But once the plague was removed, Pharaoh hardened his heart again. The third plague, gnats. Aaron struck the dust, and it became gnats, covering people and animals. This time, the magicians couldn't replicate it. They told Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." They recognized divine power beyond their ability to match. But Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. The fourth plague, flies. Swarms of flies filled Egypt, but in Goshen, where the Israelites lived, there were no flies. This plague made a distinction between Egypt and Israel, showing God's protection of his people. Pharaoh tried to bargain, saying they could sacrifice to God in Egypt. Moses refused. They had to go into the wilderness. Pharaoh agreed they could go a short distance. Moses prayed. The flies left, but Pharaoh hardened his heart again. The fifth plague, disease on livestock. All Egyptian livestock died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. The sixth plague, boils. Moses threw handfuls of soot toward heaven, and it became a fine dust over Egypt, causing boils on people and animals. Even the magicians couldn't stand before Moses because of the boils. But God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Notice the pattern. Sometimes the text says Pharaoh hardened his own heart, sometimes that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. This raises difficult theological questions about free will and divine sovereignty that we'll return to. But the immediate point is that Pharaoh was becoming increasingly stubborn even as the plagues grew worse. The seventh plague, hail. God told Moses to warn Pharaoh that this plague would be worse, that he should bring his livestock and servants inside, or they would die. Some Egyptians feared God's word and brought their livestock in. Others didn't. Moses stretched out his staff, and hail fell with fire flashing through it, destroying everything in the fields. Only in Goshen was there no hail. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "This time I have sinned. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Plead with the Lord, for there has been enough of God's thunder and hail. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer." Moses agreed to pray as soon as he left the city, but he added, "But as for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear the Lord God." And he was right. Once the hail stopped, Pharaoh sinned again and hardened his heart. The eighth plague, locusts. Pharaoh's servants begged him to let the Israelites go, asking, "Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron back, willing to let the men go, but not the women and children. Moses refused. They all had to go. Pharaoh drove them out in anger. Moses stretched out his staff, and an east wind brought locusts that covered the land so thickly you couldn't see the ground. They ate every plant the hail had left. Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron back. "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now, therefore, forgive my sin. Please, only this once, and plead with the Lord your God only to remove this death from me." Moses prayed. A strong west wind drove the locusts into the Red Sea, but Pharaoh hardened his heart again. The ninth plague, darkness. Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all Egypt for 3 days. People couldn't see each other, couldn't move from their places. But the Israelites had light where they lived. Pharaoh called Moses again, said they could go, take their children, but leave their livestock. Moses refused. They needed the livestock for sacrifices. Pharaoh told Moses, "Get away from me. Take care never to see my face again, for on the day you see my face, you shall die." Moses agreed. "As you say, I will not see your face again." The stage was set for the final, most devastating plague. But first, God gave Moses detailed instructions for something that would become the defining ritual of Jewish identity: Passover. Part 4. The Night of Death and Deliverance. Passover's birth. Before the 10th plague, God gave Moses and Aaron instructions that would change everything. This month would become the first month of the year for Israel. On the 10th day of the month, each household was to select a lamb or young goat, a male without blemish, 1 year old. They were to keep it until the 14th day, then slaughter it at twilight. They were to take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of their houses. They were to roast the lamb and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, dressed for travel with their belts fastened, their sandals on, their staffs in hand. They were to eat it in haste. It was the Lord's Passover. God explained what would happen. "For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This was not just another plague. This was personal, targeting every Egyptian family, from Pharaoh to the slave girl. It would be an assault on Egypt's future, on their hope, on their firstborn sons who would inherit and continue their families. But it was also a ritual of salvation for Israel. The blood on the doorposts marked these houses as protected, covered by a sacrificial lamb. This would become the central metaphor of redemption in Jewish and later Christian theology. Deliverance through blood, through substitutionary sacrifice. The instructions continued. This was to become a lasting ordinance, celebrated every year as a memorial of how God brought them out of Egypt. For 7 days they would eat unleavened bread, bread made without yeast, because they left Egypt in such haste they couldn't wait for dough to rise. The first day and seventh day were to be sacred assemblies, with no work done except preparing food. Moses called all the elders and told them these instructions. He told them what to say when their children asked, "What do you mean by this service?" They were to answer, "It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, for he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians but spared our houses." The people bowed their heads and worshipped. Then they did exactly as God commanded. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from Pharaoh's firstborn, who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants and all the Egyptians. There was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Imagine that sound. Not the cry of battle or natural disaster, but the simultaneous grief of an entire nation discovering their firstborn children dead. Every family, every household, from the palace to the prison. The wailing, the horror, the absolute devastation. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, "Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go, serve the Lord, as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also." He asked for a blessing. The mighty Pharaoh, who had claimed not to know the Lord, who had hardened his heart through 9 plagues, now begged Moses for a blessing. He was broken, defeated, desperate. The Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste, saying, "We shall all be dead." They gave the Israelites silver and gold jewelry and clothing, whatever they asked for. The text says the Israelites plundered the Egyptians. The wealth of Egypt became reparations for centuries of slave labor. The people of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Sukkoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. A mixed multitude also went with them, along with very much livestock. They baked unleavened cakes from the dough they had brought from Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait. The time the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of watching by the Lord, to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this same night is a night of watching kept to the Lord by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. They were finally free. the impossible had happened. The greatest empire on earth had released hundreds of thousands of slaves because their God had demonstrated power beyond anything Pharaoh could comprehend. But God didn't lead them directly to Canaan. The text says, God didn't lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, though that was shorter, because God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Instead, God led them by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. God went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light. The cloud and fire never left its place before the people. This was visible, tangible evidence of divine guidance. They weren't following maps or rumors, but God Himself. Meanwhile, Pharaoh's grief turned to rage and regret. His officials said to him, "What have we done? We have let Israel go from serving us." Pharaoh prepared his chariot and took his army, 600 chosen chariots, and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. He pursued the people of Israel as they went out defiantly. The Egyptians overtook them, encamped by the sea. When the Israelites saw Pharaoh's army approaching, they panicked. They said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." This complaint would be repeated in various forms throughout their journey. The Israelites, when faced with danger or discomfort, would wish they had stayed in Egypt. They would remember slavery as better than uncertainty. Fear overwhelmed their faith again and again. Moses answered them with words that defined his leadership. "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." Then God told Moses to lift up his staff and stretch out his hand over the sea, dividing it so the people could go through on dry ground. The angel of God, who was going before them, moved to their rear, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them to behind them, coming between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. There was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. The people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Think about what this meant to them. They were walking through the sea, walls of water on both sides, held back by nothing visible, only God's power. The seabed beneath their feet, still wet, but passable. Hundreds of thousands of people, with children and livestock, moving through what should have been certain death. The Egyptians pursued them into the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. In the morning, watch the Lord look down on the Egyptian forces from the pillar of fire and of cloud, and threw them into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." But it was too late. God told Moses to stretch out his hand again, and the sea returned to its normal course. The Egyptians fled into it, and the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen. Of all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea, not one of them remained. The Israelites saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. They saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Then Moses and the people sang a song to the Lord, one of the oldest poems in the Bible. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. The song went on, celebrating God's power, recounting the drowning of the Egyptians, looking forward to establishing God's people in the promised land. Miriam, Aaron's and Moses' sister, took a tambourine, and all the women followed her with tambourines and dancing, and she sang, Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. This was the moment of total deliverance. They were free. Their pursuers were dead. They had seen God's power demonstrated beyond any doubt. They believed. They worshiped. They celebrated. But belief born in miracles is fragile, and the wilderness would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. Part 5. The Wilderness, Testing and Teaching. 3 days after crossing the Red Sea, the Israelites came to Marah, but they couldn't drink the water there because it was bitter. The people grumbled against Moses, asking, What shall we drink? Moses cried out to the Lord, and God showed him a log. Moses threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. 3 days. That's how long their faith lasted after the greatest miracle in their history. Already they were complaining, already questioning whether Moses knew what he was doing. God made a statute and a rule for them there, saying, If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord, your healer. They came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there. But then they set out again into the wilderness, and a month and a half after leaving Egypt, the whole congregation grumbled against Moses and Aaron. They said, Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. They were remembering Egypt through rose-colored glasses. Yes, they sat by meat pots, as slaves serving their masters. Yes, they had bread, the bread of oppression. They were conveniently forgetting the harsh labor, the beatings, the murder of their children. Now that they faced hunger and uncertainty, Egypt seemed better. God told Moses he would rain bread from heaven for them. Every morning, they were to gather enough for that day. On the 6th day, they would gather twice as much, because on the 7th day, the Sabbath, no manna would fall. Moses and Aaron told the people, At evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord. That evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. When the dew evaporated, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost. The people asked, What is it? Moses told them, It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This was manna, and it would be their primary food for 40 years. It appeared every morning except the Sabbath. They were to gather it daily, not hoarding, trusting God would provide again tomorrow. Those who tried to keep it overnight found it bred worms and stank. Only on the sixth day could they keep it overnight without spoiling, because the seventh day was for rest. The manna sustained them, but it also tested them. Would they trust God's daily provision? Would they keep the Sabbath even when it required planning ahead? Would they be satisfied with what God gave, or always want more? They camped at Rephidim, and again there was no water. Again they quarreled with Moses. "Give us water to drink." Moses responded, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But they were thirsty and grumbled, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst." Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." God told him to take some elders and his staff, the one he struck the Nile with, and go to the rock at Horeb. God would stand before him there. Moses was to strike the rock, and water would come out. Moses did this in the sight of the elders, and water gushed out. He called the place Massa and Meribah, testing and quarreling, because the people tested God, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" After witnessing the plagues, the Red Sea crossing, the daily provision of manna, they still doubted God's presence. This wasn't rational skepticism, but the result of fear, discomfort, and spiritual immaturity. They believed when things went well and doubted when things got hard. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses told Joshua to choose men and fight while he stood on top of the hill with the staff of God in his hand. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered it, Amalek prevailed. When Moses' hands grew heavy, Aaron and Hur held them up, one on each side, so his hands remained steady until sunset. Joshua defeated Amalek. This is the first battle Israel fought, and it required both Joshua's military leadership and Moses' intercession. The staff represented divine authority. Holding it up was maintaining God's power over the battle. When Moses grew tired, he needed support. This pattern would repeat. Moses couldn't do everything alone. Moses' father-in-law Jethro came to visit, bringing Zipporah and Moses' two sons. When Jethro saw Moses sitting as judge for the people from morning till evening, he asked, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses explained that people came to him to inquire of God, to settle disputes, to learn God's statutes and laws. Jethro said, "What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone." Jethro advised Moses to appoint capable men as leaders over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens to judge the people at all times. Only the hard cases should come to Moses. This would ease the burden and allow Moses to focus on representing the people before God and teaching them God's statutes. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did what he said. This is remarkable. Moses, the prophet who spoke with God, was humble enough to take advice from his father-in-law about administrative structure. He wasn't so proud as to insist on doing everything his own way. This delegation became the foundation of Israel's judicial system. 3 months after leaving Egypt, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped before the mountain. Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, 'You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation.'" This was the covenant proposition. God had delivered them. Now he offered them a special relationship, not because they earned it, but because he chose them. They would be his treasured possession, a kingdom of priests mediating between God and the nations, a holy nation set apart for his purposes. Moses reported these words to the people, and they answered together, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." They didn't know what they were agreeing to yet. The specifics would come later. But they accepted the covenant in principle. God told Moses to consecrate the people, to have them wash their garments and be ready for the third day, because on the third day the Lord would come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Moses was to set limits around the mountain so no one touched it, because whoever touched it would be put to death. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Moses brought them out to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him in thunder. The Lord came down on Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain and called Moses to come up. God told him to go down and warn the people not to break through to see the Lord, lest many of them perish. Even the priests who came near needed to consecrate themselves. Then God spoke all these words, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." This is the preamble, the identification. Before giving commands, God reminded them who he was and what he had done. The commandments that followed were not arbitrary rules, but the reasonable response to redemption. Because God had freed them, because they belonged to him, therefore they should live in certain ways. What followed were the 10 Commandments, or 10 words, the foundation of the covenant, the core of God's requirements for his people. Part 6, the law, 10 words that changed the world. The 10 Commandments are probably the most influential legal code in human history. They shaped Western law, ethics, and political philosophy. They introduced revolutionary concepts that we now take for granted. But in their ancient context, they were shocking and unprecedented. "You shall have no other gods before me." This was the first and most fundamental command. Israel was to worship YHWH alone, not YHWH plus Egyptian gods, not YHWH as one god among many, but YHWH exclusively. This was monotheism, the belief in one God who tolerates no rivals. In the ancient world, this was bizarre. Nations had patron deities, but everyone acknowledged other gods existed. You might worship your national god primarily while respecting other nations' gods. But Israel's God claimed total allegiance, insisted he was the only real God, demanded exclusive worship. "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them." This prohibited any physical representation of God. While other nations created statues of their gods, Israel was forbidden from doing so. Why? because God is spirit, transcendent, beyond physical form. Any image would limit him, reduce him, make people think they could control or manipulate him. This command also separated worship from magic. In ancient paganism, if you had an idol, you had a channel to that god's power. But Israel couldn't have God in a box, couldn't manipulate divine power through rituals centered on objects. They had to relate to an invisible, uncontrollable God who revealed himself through words and acts, not images. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. This prohibited using God's name wrongly, whether through false oaths, cursing, magic spells, or empty religious talk. God's name represents his character, his reputation, his authority. To misuse it is to disrespect him fundamentally. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. This was revolutionary. A day off every week, not for the elite, but for everyone, including slaves and animals. This command dignified labor by limiting it, established rhythm between work and rest, and oriented time around worship rather than productivity. The Sabbath reminded Israel that they weren't slaves anymore. Slaves work whenever masters demand. Free people work 6 days and rest 1, acknowledging that rest is built into creation's pattern, that humans aren't machines, that there's more to life than production. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. This established family structure as foundational to society. Children were to honor parents, not just obey them while young, but respect them throughout life, especially in their old age. This protected the elderly, maintained generational continuity, and created stable families as society's building blocks. This is the first commandment with a promise attached. Honor your parents, and you'll have long life in the land. The implication is that societies that care for their elderly, that maintain family integrity, endure. Those that don't, collapse. You shall not murder. This prohibited unauthorized killing. The Hebrew word ratzach specifically means murder, not all killing. Killing in war, capital punishment, and self-defense weren't prohibited. But murder, taking innocent life without legal authority, was absolutely forbidden. This command established that human life is sacred, made in God's image, not to be taken lightly or unjustly. It created a presumption against killing that required justification. You couldn't kill someone just because they inconvenienced you, offended you, or you coveted what they had. You shall not commit adultery. This protected marriage as a sacred covenant. Sexual relationships were bounded by marriage commitment. Adultery violated that covenant, betrayed trust, damaged families, and created social chaos. This command established that sexuality has moral dimensions, that people aren't just animals following instinct, that self-control and covenant-keeping matter. It protected women from being treated as property because adultery was wrong, even if the husband didn't object. You shall not steal. This protected private property and established that people have rights to what they own. You couldn't just take what belonged to someone else whether property, labor, or rights. This command created the foundation for economic systems based on ownership, voluntary exchange, and respect for others' goods. It prevented the strong from simply taking from the weak, established that might doesn't make right regarding possessions. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. This protected truth in legal proceedings and in general discourse. You couldn't lie about someone in court or in daily life. Your word had to be trustworthy, your testimony accurate. This command created the foundation for justice systems. If people routinely lied in court, justice would be impossible. The prohibition against false witness protected the innocent from being convicted by perjury and established truth-telling as a social duty. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. This final command addressed internal attitudes, not just external actions. You could obey all the other commands while seething with envy and desire for what others have. But God demanded not just right actions, but right heart attitudes. Coveting is the root of many other sins. Adultery begins with coveting your neighbor's spouse. Stealing begins with coveting your neighbor's possessions. Murder can begin with coveting your neighbor's position or inheritance. By prohibiting covetousness, this command attacked sin at its source. When the people heard the thunder and saw the lightnings and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain smoking, they trembled with fear and stood far off. They said to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die." Moses told them not to fear, that God came to test them, that the fear of him might be before them to keep them from sinning. But the people stood far off while Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. God then gave Moses many more laws, detailed applications of the 10 Commandments covering worship, slavery, violence, property damage, theft, social justice, religious festivals, and more. These filled several chapters and formed the Book of the Covenant that would govern Israel's life. God also gave detailed instructions for building the tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where he would dwell among them. The specifications were extraordinarily precise. Dimensions, materials, colors, furnishings, all exactly prescribed. The tabernacle would have an outer courtyard, a holy place, and an inner most holy place where God's presence would dwell above the Ark of the Covenant. God called specific artisans by name to build the tabernacle, filling them with his Spirit, with ability and intelligence, with knowledge and all craftsmanship. This shows that artistic skill is a divine gift, that beauty and craftsmanship matter to God, that creating the space where God dwells requires the best human creativity and skill. Moses stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights, neither eating bread nor drinking water. God wrote the 10 Commandments on 2 stone tablets with his own finger. These tablets were testimony to the covenant, permanent record of the core commands. But while Moses was on the mountain receiving the law, the people below were breaking it in the most spectacular way possible. Part 7. The Golden Calf. When the people fall. When the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." 40 days was too long to wait. They wanted gods they could see, touch, control. They wanted something tangible to worship, something that wouldn't disappear on mountaintops for weeks. They missed the Egyptian gods they'd grown up with, gods represented by statues, gods you could visit at temples. And Aaron, Moses' brother, the one God appointed to speak for Moses, incredibly agreed. He told them to take off their gold earrings and bring them to him. He took the gold, fashioned it with a graving tool, and made a golden calf. The people said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." A calf, like the Egyptian god Apis, like Hathor, the cow goddess, like the Canaanite god Baal, often represented as a young bull. They were reverting to paganism, creating an idol, violating the first two commandments while Moses was receiving them from God. Aaron built an altar before it and proclaimed, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." He tried to blend worship of YHWH with idol worship, as if you could have it both ways. But God had explicitly forbidden this. There was no middle ground. The people rose early the next day, offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, then sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. The play was likely sexual immorality associated with pagan worship rites. They were celebrating with an orgy around the golden calf they claimed was the God who saved them from Egypt. God told Moses, "Go down, for your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves." Notice God distanced himself. Your people, whom you brought up. Not my people, whom I brought up, but your people, Moses, as if disowning them. God described what they'd done, making the calf and worshiping it, attributing their deliverance to it. Then God said something shocking. "Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you." God was offering to wipe out Israel and start over with Moses. Moses could become the new Abraham, father of a great nation. It seemed like the perfect solution. The people had proven themselves faithless, breaking the covenant immediately. Why not start fresh? But Moses pleaded with God. He gave 3 arguments. First, remember Egypt. Why should the Egyptians say, "With evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth"? If God destroyed Israel now, it would make him look evil or weak, as if he couldn't maintain his own people. Second, remember the patriarchs. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and said to them, "I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever." God made promises. Those promises bind him. He can't just give up on Israel without violating his own word. Third, implicitly, think about mercy. Don't let your anger override your compassion. You're a God who forgives, who shows steadfast love. Act according to your nature. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. This is one of the most remarkable verses in Scripture. God changed his mind based on Moses' intercession. Prayer mattered. Moses' advocacy saved the nation. Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, tablets written on both sides, written by God himself. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he thought it was war. But Moses recognized it as the sound of singing. As soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. He threw the tablets and broke them at the foot of the mountain. The tablets containing God's writing, the physical testimony of the covenant, shattered. The covenant was broken before the ink was dry. Moses took the calf, burned it with fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the people of Israel drink it. This was humiliating and possibly sickening. The God they had worshipped was reduced to contaminated water they had to consume. Their deity became waste in their bodies. Then Moses confronted Aaron. "What did this people do to you, that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" Aaron's response is one of the most pathetic in Scripture. "Let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. For they said to me, 'Make us gods who shall go before us.' As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So I said to them, 'Let any who have gold take it off.' So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. This is absurd. I threw the gold in the fire, and out came this calf. As if the calf formed itself, as if Aaron had nothing to do with fashioning it. He was deflecting, blaming the people, refusing to take responsibility for his catastrophic leadership failure. Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose, to the derision of their enemies. Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Come to me." All the sons of Levi gathered to him. He told them to put their swords on their sides and go through the camp, killing their brothers, companions, and neighbors. The sons of Levi did as Moses commanded, and about 3,000 men fell that day. Moses said, "Today you have been ordained for the service of the Lord, each one at the cost of his son and of his brother, so that he might bestow a blessing upon you this day." This is one of the most disturbing passages in the Bible. Mass execution of Israelites by Israelites, ordered by Moses, carried out by the Levites, killing 3,000 people. This was not battle against external enemies, but judgment on covenant breakers within the camp. The severity shows how serious idolatry was. It wasn't just a mistake or cultural misunderstanding. It was rebellion against God, violation of the covenant, reverting to paganism after experiencing God's deliverance. It threatened to corrupt the entire nation, to destroy what God was building. The Levites' willingness to execute judgment, even against their own relatives, proved their loyalty to God above family loyalty. This would become their defining characteristic, and because of it, they were set apart for priestly service. The next day, Moses said to the people, "You have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin." Moses went back to God and said, "Alas, this people has sinned a great sin. They have made for themselves gods of gold. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written." Moses offered to be damned in their place. If God couldn't forgive them, Moses wanted his own name erased from the book of life. He would accept destruction if it meant the people could survive. This is one of the most stunning acts of intercession in all of Scripture, foreshadowing the greater intercession of Christ, who would actually accomplish what Moses only offered. But God told Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. But now go, lead the people to the place about which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them." God refused Moses' offer. Each person would bear their own sin. But he agreed to continue leading them to the promised land, though through an angel rather than his direct presence, because they were a stiff-necked people, and he might consume them on the way. When the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. God told Moses to tell them, "You are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do with you." Moses took the tent and pitched it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and called it the tent of meeting. Everyone who sought the Lord would go out to this tent outside the camp. When Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance, and the Lord would speak with Moses. The people would rise up and worship, each at his tent door, watching the pillar of cloud at the tent entrance. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his assistant Joshua would not depart from the tent. Moses pleaded with God to show him his ways, to teach him, to make his presence go with them. "If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth?" God agreed. "This very thing that you have spoken I will do, for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." Then Moses asked, "Please show me your glory." God said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." God told Moses to stand in a cleft of the rock while his glory passed by. God would cover Moses with his hand until he had passed. Then God would take away his hand, and Moses would see God's back, but not his face.